They say the saints always knew more than they revealed. A few figures in modern Catholic history hold as much spiritual weight and mystery as Padre Pio. Known for his stigmata, prophetic visions, and direct battles with the demonic, Padre Pio was a man deeply connected to the divine and possibly even the future. While many people have long revered his teachings and miracles, few have paid attention to his darker, more chilling predictions until now. Because as 2025 approaches, some of the signs he warned about are eerily lining up with current events. And what was once written off as spiritual metaphor or apocalyptic fear-mongering is now being re-examined as prophetic warning in the quiet corners of the Catholic world. Certain letters and testimonies from Padre Pio have circulated for decades. One of the most infamous among them is the so-called 3 Days of Darkness prophecy. While it has been debated whether it was actually penned by Padre Pio himself or simply inspired by his words, many faithful believe that the spirit of the prophecy reflects exactly what he warned his closest followers about. In this prophecy, Padre Pio supposedly warned of a period of divine punishment, where total darkness would engulf the earth for 3 full days. During this time, demons would be unleashed to roam freely, attacking the unfaithful and destroying the wicked. Only those who remained in prayer, with blessed candles and closed windows, would survive the onslaught. That might sound far-fetched to the secular world, but recent global developments have reignited interest in his words. Environmental collapse, increasing war threats, freak weather events, and moral decay have made even skeptics stop and reconsider. Fires ravage parts of the world in places that were once considered immune. Floods wipe out towns in a single night. Political tensions are pushing humanity to the edge of nuclear conflict. Even within the church, there's growing confusion and division. All of this reflects the kind of chaos Padre Pio warned about in his private conversations with the faithful. And then there's the prophecy of the red skies. Padre Pio is said to have mentioned that one of the signs of God's coming judgment would be red skies appearing across the world. In 2024 and into 2025, strange red auroras and glowing red skies have been reported in areas that have never experienced such phenomena before. Scientists attribute it to solar activity, but believers are starting to ask, what if it's more than that? What if it's a warning? One of the lesser-known aspects of Padre Pio's visions involves a spiritual deception that would begin in the church itself. He allegedly foresaw a time when many high-ranking clergy would fall into moral corruption, leading the faithful astray. In recent years, many have pointed to internal scandals, doctrinal confusion, and even conflicting messages coming from the Vatican as signs that this prophecy is unfolding right in front of us. Devout Catholics are starting to feel isolated. Some say the church is drifting from its foundation. Others feel that spiritual truths are being replaced with political narratives. Padre Pio reportedly said the devil would infiltrate the church, not with violence, but with compromise, and that time may have come. There's also the technology factor. While Padre Pio lived during the early to mid-20th century, some of his visions included references that didn't quite make sense back then, but do now. He reportedly spoke of lights in the sky that do not come from heaven and voices speaking through glass. Back then, people thought it was symbolic, but now with satellites, drones, artificial intelligence, and global surveillance, those cryptic words feel eerily accurate. And as AI becomes more embedded in our daily lives, questions about transhumanism, soul manipulation, and spiritual detachment grow stronger. Another alarming point lies in his repeated warnings about youth and the loss of innocence. Padre Pio reportedly cried often about the future of children. He warned that the purity of children would be stolen, not through war, but through culture, media, and education. He predicted a time where morality would be inverted, where what was once shameful would be celebrated, and what was once holy would be mocked. In today's world, with explicit content, moral relativism, and confusion around fundamental identity questions, many feel this part of his prophecy has fully come to pass. Padre Pio was also deeply concerned with false peace. He warned that just before a major collapse, there would be a season of false hope, where people believed things were getting better only to be blindsided by judgment. He described a period where nations would sign agreements of peace, but their hearts would be preparing for war. Looking at the geopolitical stage in 2025, where superpowers like the US, China, Russia, and NATO countries are playing dangerous games while still calling for peace talks, it's difficult to ignore the parallels. But perhaps the most chilling part of Padre Pio's prophecy was his timeline. Some of his spiritual children claim that he pointed to the mid-2020s as a pivot point, a time when decisions made would either save or doom humanity. He reportedly said that after a certain pope, there would be confusion, division, and then silence from heaven. The silence would not be absence, but preparation. Many are now re-examining the recent years since Pope Benedict's death and the changes under Pope Francis, trying to decode whether Padre Pio's warning about the next shepherd has already come to pass. Not everyone believes these warnings. Of course, skeptics argue that apocalyptic predictions have existed forever. But the difference with Padre Pio is his track record. He predicted the Second World War, the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, and even the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. His letters, preserved in Vatican archives and private collections, are filled with warnings cloaked in poetic language, meant to be deciphered by the faithful, not decoded by the world. Even his death was prophetic. He passed away in 1968, shortly after warning that a storm was approaching and that the world was not ready for the purging fire of purification. He asked his followers to pray more, fast more, and stop relying so much on technology and modern distractions. It wasn't just religious advice, it was survival guidance. Now, as 2025 unfolds, many followers are returning to Padre Pio's life and teachings not for comfort, but for direction. People are preparing their homes with blessed items. Others are seeking out confession after years away from the church. There is a noticeable rise in spiritual urgency, something stirring. That feels deeper than fear. It feels like a wake-up call. In places like Italy, the Philippines, Latin America, and even rural areas of the United States, people are gathering to discuss his prophecies. Retreats are being held in his honor. Some believers say that apparitions and miracles tied to Padre Pio are increasing, especially among those who are fasting or devoting themselves to prayer. Others say his spiritual presence has grown stronger as the world becomes darker. No one knows for sure what will happen in the next year or two. But one thing is becoming clear. Padre Pio's legacy is not just about miracles or sainthood. It's about preparation. It's about listening before it's too late. And it's about understanding that the spiritual battle is not just real, it's already happening. Whether or not the 3 days of darkness comes in the form of literal destruction, the moral and spiritual darkness seems undeniable. Padre Pio warned that when people stopped fearing sin more than death, society would begin to collapse from within. Looking around today, his words no longer sound like warnings, they sound like reports, and maybe that's the biggest sign of all. Padre Pio's warnings weren't just about fear, they were always wrapped in hope. Even in the face of darkness, he told the faithful that God would never abandon his people. He spoke of a remnant, a small group of people who would hold tight to the truth, no matter how much pressure came from the world around them. These people would be tested, ridiculed, and even persecuted, but their faith would be the light that guides others through the storm. That's why some of the most devout followers of Padre Pio believe that the trials of 2025 aren't the end but the beginning of purification, a necessary cleansing. He reportedly told one nun that the world would go through a fire not to destroy, but to cleanse, and that what comes after would be more beautiful than anything mankind has ever seen. But he warned, too, that many would not survive spiritually, because their hearts would be hardened by pride, comfort, and disbelief. This is why many are returning to confession, why old traditions are being picked up again, why people are praying the rosary daily, fasting on Fridays, and seeking spiritual direction. They don't know what form the prophecy will take: economic collapse, war, environmental destruction, or something entirely supernatural, but they feel it's close, it's in the air, it's in the unease people can't quite explain. In recent months, several mystics and visionaries have come forward saying that Padre Pio has appeared to them in dreams or meditations, repeating one phrase over and over: prepare your soul. The time is short. These messages aren't always accepted by the church, but they resonate deeply with those who've studied Padre Pio's life. He was a man who never sought fame or attention. Only obedience to Christ, and his posthumous warnings follow that same pattern. They're not designed to cause panic. They're designed to push us to repentance. One of the most symbolic pieces of his prophecy relates to nature turning against man. He allegedly spoke of a time when the earth itself would shake in rejection of man's sins. In 2025, strange earthquakes have hit regions not typically prone to seismic activity. Volcanic eruptions, violent storms, and bizarre weather patterns are becoming more common. Some scientists call it climate change. Believers call it judgment. Either way, it's happening and faster than expected. Padre Pio also spoke of children being born into a world without faith, without guidance, and without love. He warned that